Hi, I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World, and in this video I'm going to show you an easy way to make a landscape background for an applique block, like this one. So we're going to make blocks that have land and sky in them. But I didn't want to have a pattern that you had to follow over and over again. I didn't want all of the landscape blocks to be the same, and I also didn't want to provide like a dozen different patterns for different landscapes. So I came up with a really easy method to cut 2 blocks at a time that give you an even balance of uphill and downhill blocks and also an even mix of land and sky. Here's how to do it. So I've been working on this dinosaur quilt, and it's a lot different than most of my other quilts. Most of my quilts just focus on a face and it's like a little portrait block, but for the dinosaurs it really needed to be whole bodies. You can do that on a solid block, which is what I usually do for my quilts, but as I was designing these I kept envisioning them in a landscape. So I really kind of wanted some land and sky, and I knew I wanted to add some volcanoes and trees and things like that. So I've got a different kind of block for this quilt. And these are what these blocks look like. So they're half land, half sky. And when you lay them all out in a row, and this quilt is going to be in rows with sashing between the rows, but not between the individual blocks, what I wanted was like a long panorama shot. And I actually don't want the seams to line up between the blocks. I really wanted this to look like kind of a young, jagged, volcanic landscape. So you'll see that none of these line up. All of the blocks have some land and some sky. Some go downhill, some go uphill, and you do want to keep those pretty evenly balanced. And I've also got an even balance of sky and land. And I'm going to show you how to do all of that without any measuring and without any like tricky cutting. This is very, very simple, and you'll get a nice even mix of blocks. So, these out of the way. You're going to need 2 pieces of fabric. Normally, I take all of my background squares and I cut them at roughly 11 inches square. For these, I'm going to cut them 11 inches wide as usual, but 12 inches tall because I'm going to have a seam in the middle of each block, and that's going to shrink it down a little bit. And I still want to have some room to trim later. So these are a little bit taller than most of my blocks. And you're going to stack them up. This is important. This method that I'm showing you only works for fabric that has no wrong side. So all of the batiks that I use from Timeless Treasures, they are good front and back. So there is no right and wrong side to this fabric. You'll also be able to use the same method with a solid that has no right and wrong side. You can use fabric that has a right and a wrong side, but it doesn't work exactly this way. So you're going to want to make some changes to that, and I'll tell you about that at the end. So you stack your blocks together, lining them up at the sides. Don't worry about lining them up top and bottom. And I'm never too fussy about cutting the height of these blocks or the width. As long as it's at least 11 wide and at least 12 tall, you're going to be good. So you stack them together. This is incredibly easy. You just set the ruler down somewhere roughly in the middle of the block. And a steeper angle is going to give you a very sharp hill. You want some that are almost level. I don't do any that are strictly straight. I never try and line it up. I always have it off a little bit. For this example, I'm going to show you just like a slight hill. It's actually easier to see what I'm doing that way. So you do that and then just cut. And then we're going to stack them. So I'm doing this quilt as you go, like I do all of my applique quilts. So each of these 2 squares is going to make 2 blocks. So I've got some batting on either side. Now, we're going to take this apart. So I've got green on the bottom, which is where the ground goes. So this is a good square. I just slide it over. I'm going to line that up there. Now, this is green at the top, which is where the sky goes. So I'm actually going to flip it upside down. This is why you want fabric that has no right side and wrong side. And now that goes on the grass side on this block. So now I've got the sky is upside, the sky is at the bottom. That means it's wrong, so I need to flip it to here. And this one, the sky is at the top, so that's right. So it just gets slid over. And then I'm just going to put right sides together, so I just flip that down, line up that raw edge, just smooth it into place, let the cotton, I don't pin or anything like that, I just let the cotton cling to itself, and we're going to take it over to the sewing machine. All right, so I've got it set up here. I'm just going to sew these together. I'm going to sew through both layers of fabric and through the batting. Lower that, and I'm using roughly a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I don't need it to be exact. I do want it to be, I don't want to get too much smaller than a 1/4 inch because then you worry that your seams could pull loose over time. But roughly a 1/4 inch, just eyeball it. You don't need to backstitch at the beginning of it or the end. And now we'll take it over to the ironing board. Okay, so here's the block that we just sewed. This is the seam that we just sewed. You want to be careful when you press this open not to stretch it. It is a seam on the bias, it's on the angle, so it does run the risk of stretching, so I'm not just going to stick the iron in there and smush it up. I'm going to very gently kind of smooth that into place without stretching anything, because that can make your seams kind of bow in the middle, and it'll make the surface of your quilt kind of wobbly. But now I am going to press that with some steam. And I've got my block. I'm going to take this back to the ironing board. I'm not going to do this here. I'm just going to show you the finished results. So when you quilt this, I just take, for this, you can't really see quilting lines, highly defined quilting lines on a batik like this. So I just did very simple straight lines that run parallel to this seam. So I threaded the machine with blue thread and just did some straight lines on the blue side, on the sky side, and then threaded it with green and did some on the green side. You can see I'm not worried about making the lines perfectly straight or perfectly parallel or perfectly even between them. I actually like a little bit of variety, so you can see I've got a really skinny line up here at the top. I just want some lines to hold everything together. So I haven't sewn this other block, but you can see what it's going to look like. So what this gives me is one downhill block and one uphill block, which is going to give me nice balance in my quilt. If I have a quilt that's all uphill blocks, it's going to make it seem like the quilt is kind of leaning. When you put all of those blocks together, you wouldn't think it would make a difference, but it makes the quilt look kind of like it's leaning to the right, or if they're all downhill, it looks like they're going to be leaning to the left. So you want an even mix, and this gives me an even mix, and it also gives me an even balance of land and sky. If you do the method that I just did with fabrics that have a right and a wrong side, you need to stack them a little differently. You need to stack them right side up, right side up. You're not putting right sides together. It's a right side up and a right side up. And you will get two blocks, but they will both be the same angle. So you'll either get two uphill blocks or two downhill blocks. And that's fine, but it just means as you're doing it, you need to pay attention so that you get an even mix by the time you're done. So you'll need to do a batch where you cut uphill and a batch where you cut downhill. And what I love about using these batiks, besides the fact that I really like that dappley look as backgrounds, is I don't have to think about it. I just cut each block as I feel like it, and I know I'm going to get an evenly balanced pair. And that's it. So that's it. It's a really easy method if you're using the system for blocks, for fabric that has no right side and no wrong side. So fabric that looks good on either side, like solids and like batiks. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.